You already know how to think in Spanish, to a certain point. For example, when I say the word hola to you, you know that means hello. You don't need to translate that in your head. You just know that it means hello. Same thing with the word gracias. You know that means thank you. But what about the word semáforo? It's likely that now you need to pause and remember what that word means. Or maybe you don't know that word at all. Entonces, ¿cómo entrenas tu cerebro para pensar en español sin traducir en tu mente? Well, there are 5 things you need to do. The first thing is to increase the amount of inputs you're getting in Spanish. So, reading more, speaking more, listening more, writing more. We want to be constantly exposing ourselves to the language. The number one reason you have to translate in your head when speaking Spanish is simply because you haven't been exposed enough to certain vocabulary and phrases. How many times have you heard the word hola? How many times have you heard the word gracias? Many, many times. But how many times have you heard the word semáforo? Probably not that much. So the only reason you don't need to translate a word like hola in your head is simply because you have heard it over and over again. That's why the next thing you need to do in order to think in Spanish is extremely important. And if you skip it, you might waste hours upon hours of your time. Inside our Fluent Spanish Speaker Academy, we focus on constant exposure to the language, so our students can have confident conversations without freezing up and having to translate in their heads. You can click the link in the video description or go to SpanishWithNate.com to join our academy and start having real conversations today. So, because constant exposure to Spanish is so important, spaced repetition flashcards are one of the most effective tools to train your mind to think in español. Let's imagine we're using a free flashcard software like Anki and are shown 3 words: de nada, la toalla, and el inodoro. For the phrase de nada, I can click easy. For la toalla, I can click good. And for el inodoro, I can click again. Now I will be showing these flashcards in different intervals, helping me learn new words and more easily memorize words I've already seen. We're increasing the amount of exposure we're getting to different vocabulary, words, phrases, and we're cementing the language into our brains, ultimately allowing us to think in Spanish. And I highly recommend that you add images to your flashcards because it allows your brain to associate vocabulary with real life objects. So the next time I see a towel, I will think towel, but I will also think la toalla. This is thinking in Spanish without having to translate in your head. The next step you need to take is to solidify your vocabulary by speaking the language. And it's okay to be literal at first. For example, I used to think that in order to say to dream about, you would say soñar de, whereas in reality, native speakers say soñar con, literally to dream with. So if I said I dreamt about 1,000 cats, I would say yo soñé con 1,000 gatos. This is clearly not a literal translation from English. Same thing with a phrase like tomar una decisión, literally to take a decision, whereas in English we would say to make a decision. So at first, you might be speaking in a very literal way. But the more and more you're exposed to unique phrases like these, the more second nature they will become to you. Now, a very important thing to understand is that during conversations, you know that you know words, but in the heat of the moment, you forget them. You just can't find them. You freeze up and it seems like you forget everything you've learned. This ultimately prevents you from thinking in Spanish. So another key piece of this puzzle is to make sure that you are speaking as much as possible. So yes, you are getting exposure to the language by listening and using flashcards and reading and writing and so on and so forth. But if you're not practicing speaking, many times all of that goes out the window. When you get nervous, you freeze up and your brain just goes into shutdown mode. And I know that speaking can be scary at first. We're nervous to make mistakes in front of people. We feel like maybe they're going to judge us or laugh at us. But remember that people want to help you and people appreciate you learning their language. So you can relax. It's normal to make mistakes. We all make mistakes. And most importantly, remember to be patient. It takes time to think in Spanish without translating in your head. This does not just happen overnight. Now, I want to speak to you in Spanish, telling you specific things I have done to think in Spanish without translating in my head. But first, I want to remind you that you need to increase the amount of input in Spanish you're getting, use flashcards, speak as much as possible, relax, and be patient. ¿Cuáles son unas cosas específicas que yo hice para poder pensar en español sin tener que traducir todo en mi mente? La primera cosa que yo hice para poder pensar en español sin tener que traducir todo en mi mente fue hablar mucho con amigos. Como ya mencioné, si no estás hablando mucho español, te va a costar un poco poder pensar en español, porque simplemente no estás acostumbrado a usar cierto vocabulario o frases o palabras durante conversaciones. También, como dije, si te sientes nervioso, es normal que te congelas durante conversaciones, te sientes así, como una escultura, así. Entonces, algo que realmente me ayudó mucho a mí fue hablar con mis amigos y personas en mi comunidad. Otra cosita que yo hice para poder pensar en español fue cambiar el idioma de mi celular de inglés a español. Entonces, en vez de ver send en mi celular, yo empecé a ver la palabra enviar. O en vez de ver en Instagram follow, yo empecé a ver la palabra seguir. Otra cosa que me ayudó mucho fue empezar a escuchar música en español todos los días. Y como tal vez ya sabes, escuchar música en español es muy divertido. También veía muchas series y películas en español, leía libros en español. Y otra cosa interesante que yo trataba de hacer cuando tenía conversaciones con la gente era tratar de no cambiar al inglés durante las conversaciones. Entonces, si yo le dijera a mi amigo Luis, oye Luis, quiero que hablemos en español. Va, me parece bien. Ok, estábamos hablando, pero luego dije, a ver, ¿cómo se dice? Bla, 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 bla. O, oye Luis, ¿cómo se dice pencil? Y me decía, ok, lápiz. Y yo, ok, muy bien. Y en vez de cambiar a inglés, decía, vamos a seguir hablando en español. Ahora aprendí esta nueva palabra y vamos a seguir con la conversación en español. Y la última cosa que yo hice y que yo sigo haciendo, la verdad, es vivir el idioma. Cuando yo digo vivir el idioma, quiere decir tratar de hacer todo en español. Ahora, obviamente, no tienes que hacer todo en español, pero es decir, cuando te despiertas, escuchas las noticias en español. Cuando estás manejando y escuchando la radio, escuchas cosas en español. Cuando ves la tele, ves cosas en español. Vivir el idioma y tener ese tipo de inmersión te va a ayudar a poder pensar en español sin tener que traducir en tu mente. Tú puedes. I think you'll like this video. Click here to watch it now.